in your Superheroes and Philosophy book to page 207. I will forewarn you, if I ask for a reader and you don't read, I'm just going to skip over it. It's called class participation, right? Yes?
Yes.
Are you grade schoolers? Are you college students?
Yes, Miss Cannon.
When your professor asks you to read, please read. All right, so let's look at the title. What does the title tell us the topic is going to be about?
Superman and philosophical theology.
Yes. And what text are we applying it to?
Kingdom Come.
And what is this alluding to? Who in this room has some religious leanings that would know what Kingdom Come is alluding to? Oh, it's mentioned in the essay.
You know, Jesus's the Book of Revelations, oncoming kingdom.
In the back, Christian?
Oh, I was just thinking of whenever he sees or says that kingdom come that will be done.
That's exactly it. It's the Lord's Prayer. You got it.
Okay.
So, they write a new Superman narrative. They actually call the new narrative Kingdom Come. It's alluding to the Lord's Prayer. So you have religious overtones within the comic itself. So Tallon and Walls is going to analyze the Kingdom Come narrative, and they're going to let you know that there is a surprising philosophical theology that's taking place in this narrative that has not been widely addressed as in previous narratives. So they welcome you to their essay, tell you that they're going to go off the beaten path, and they're going to talk about a philosophical, theological interaction with other famous superhero comic books. By the way, did y'all hear yesterday that Stan Lee died?
Yep.
Oh my.
I instantly thought.
Like, my world's wrecked right now. Like, you know, you have those moments where you know where you were at such and such time when something happened. That was me yesterday. Was anybody else with me? No, I was all alone. The great Stan Lee is gone. Cannot believe it. Wow. I can't teach today without mentioning that Stan Lee passed away. Man, all the stories that he's given us. He made the cameo for the next Marvel movie. That will be his last cameo. That will be it. There will be no more Stan Lee cameos unless they CGI it somehow. So that whole genre of Stan Lee cameos in the movie.
It's the worst part.
Right?
He's like, it's not really even a movie without him in it.
I know.
That's what I said yesterday. I was like, that's the worst part. I'm gonna miss all these cameos.
He was just such a down-to-earth guy. He was funny. Really liked him. All right, that was my side thing.
Tony Stank. Are you Tony Stank?
Oh, I love that one. All right, so now I'll try to focus yet again on this. So they say that theological discussions are like those unwanted, humorless English majors like myself. We think we're being funny. We're not truly being funny, right? But nevertheless, the philosophical theologian and the comic book writer aren't necessarily working at cross purposes. And they start to do a comparison between the philosophical theologian and comic book writer. So this is a comparison and contrast essay. They talk to you about ethical issues, Christian theology, and the respective roles that these two genres share. So they tell you that the Bible has the devil, the Marvel Universe has the Spawn. So they're starting to show you how both narratives have similar characters within them. Now, please do not sit here and be mad at me if I don't sit here and talk to you from a theological point of view and tell you that the Word of God is wholly devout and cannot be debunked. That is not my job as your English teacher, okay? And it's not my job to cut it down either, so you're not going to get an opinion from me. All you're going to get is what's here in this book. Are we cool with that? Okay. Some students will get upset if I don't take a stand, and I'm not going to take one. Then they tell you there's a third one as a point of contact regarding the classic superhero Superman. And he says that they say that Superman is like Jesus Christ. They tell you that Siegel and Schuster, who were Jewish, did purposely make parallels between Superman and Moses / Jesus Christ, because in the Jewish tradition, Moses is the forerunner, and Jews do not believe that Jesus Christ is the reincarnated God, but Christians do. So you say Moses / Jesus Christ. If you're talking about Jews, it's going to be Moses. If you're talking about Christians, it's going to be Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Are you following me? Okay. So they point out this similarity. You turn the page to 208, and they tell you that both of these share a dynamic entrance story where they are both stranger and citizen. So they talk about the fact that Superman is from the planet Krypton, and that Jesus Christ is from the heavens, how they both arrived here, and how they both live their lives. After they do this comparison and show you what these two narratives have in common, they go on to say that one could go on like this all day, but it's enough to say that the philosophical theology shares sufficient common ground with the world of superheroes to make for an interesting conversation, as we hope to show. Specifically, we need to discuss eschatology, the branch of theology that deals with final things or ultimate outcomes. So if you're dealing with any philosophical concept that's dealing with final outcomes, you are dealing with eschatology. And this way of thinking considers the huge issues that a person will naturally care about. So what would be some big issues with final outcomes?
You're just like asking for examples that we make up.
Yeah.
I feel like, wait, can you narrow that question a little bit?
Nope.
I don't know. I hear a lot of eschatology in terms of like zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. What happens in a zombie apocalypse?
There's an outbreak of a virus and people become affected, and then they start, feasting on human flesh, and then it continues to turn into mass hysteria and mass chaos, and everyone becomes affected, and you have to start killing people you love, and it kind of takes away your humanity, and yeah.
So we lose humanity. What's the final outcome of an apocalypse?
Death to a world.
Yes. So the ultimate outcome is the cease of human existence, right?
Right.
Which is basically what all of our huge questions deal with, is what happens after death? After a corporeal being ceases to finally take in oxygen, after their brain no longer registers any activity, after you are clinically no longer living, what happens? Is there anything that happens? That's what eschatology is about. And so they define it for you even. They even say it's about the fate of humanity, it's about the cosmos as a whole, all these things. And then they tell you that one of the best narratives ever written to discuss these things is Kingdom Come. And so that's going to be their example. In this narrative, as Tess said, Kingdom Come does look at the book of Revelations, and it does look at Jesus Christ of Nazareth, not just Moses. Okay? So, Tallon and Walls say the story superbly told through the words of Mark Waid and the paintings of Alex Ross. Can somebody please read what's in the yellow?
Begin some decades in the future, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and the Green Lantern, Hawkman have all retreated from fighting crime into lives of relative isolation. The old Justice League has disbanded and a new breed of vicious superheroes has taken their place.
Alright, so we know that the classic stuff that my dear Stan Lee wrote, has disbanded. They're no longer there. And these evil, alternate, multiverse superheroes are in their way, and they're corrupting all the morals. And so, the solid and sturdy morality this year has been replaced with a postmodern drama of superhero power plays. The old ways of fighting crime no longer apply. Uh-oh. There's chaos in the superhero world. Remember I told you, on one hand I can count the amount of pages that I have circled, 210 is one of those pages. The superhero is every man. All of us can be a superhero. And because we can all be a superhero, we should look closely at Superman's situation and examine it as questions about the human obligation to combat injustice as well as our prospects for succeeding. Now, injustice isn't necessarily a crime. Injustice can be other things, right? It can be people getting hurt due to an accident. It could be a fire, it could be a flood, it could be a tornado, it could be anything, yes? Injustice comes in many forms. It's not necessarily someone committing a violent crime against another person. So since we can all be superheroes and we all need to look at Superman, we need to make sure that we examine hope, our obligation to fight injustice, and what the big picture is. And that's what they do in their next subsection. First, they apply it to Wonder Woman before they go on to apply it to Kingdom Come. After they discuss Wonder Woman, they narrow their argument by addressing the naysayers, and they say we have to consider deeper issues that involve what we believe about the bigger picture of life. And they say there are two opposing worldviews, and it's these two worldviews that need to be explored in order to have a valid argument. They tell you they've already briefly mentioned one of those, and that's been dominant in the West for 2 millennia, and that's the worldview of Christian theism. So, theism, could somebody please read what's in the yellow?
Worldview of Christian theism. Christian theism states simply that there is a God who created the universe for a purpose, who then entered the creation in the person of Christ, and who will direct the future of it all to a proper moral and spiritual culmination.
Did you follow that? Yeah? Okay. Then they tell you there's an opposing philosophy. So now what they're going to do is they're going to oppose Christian theism against naturalism. So let's go read what naturalism is. And can somebody please read from the view of naturalism down to where it starts with right here, Bertrand Russell.
Naturalism roughly states that there are no supernatural forces operating in the universe, only natural ones. So there is no God or anything like God that can create or interfere with the material world. Matter in motion governed by natural laws is all that exists. Interestingly, naturalism has its own eschatology, an account of the final outcome of things very different from the one to be found in Christian theism. To see this, we can reflect for a moment on this famous statement of naturalism by the distinguished 20th century British philosopher, Bertrand Russell.
Thank you. So, what would be in between naturalism and Christian theism?
Yeah.
Agnosticism.
Who's saying what?
She's saying like agnostic.
All right, so do you want to explain agnostic, but you're gonna have to get somewhere where I can see your face.
From what I'm not agnostic, but from my understanding, it's like they believe that something is out there, but it's more of an ambiguous. They don't know what it is. They're not gonna identify it because they don't feel like we have the capacity to understand it.
I think you explained it quite well. Let's see. Christian, you have your computer up. Google agnosticism, please. Anybody else already have it pulled up? Go for it.
Agnosticism is the view that the existence of God, of the divine or the supernatural, is unknown or unknowable. An agnostic can also be one who holds neither of two opposing positions on such topic.
Yep, so they're on the continuum of opinion. So we have Christian theism, we have agnosticism, we have naturalism. What's something else on the continuum of opinion?
Other.
Okay, so atheism, yeah, there is no God at all, which would be sort of like naturalism. Tess?
Other religions like Buddhism?
Okay, so they believe in polytheism. Yeah, so we have polytheism as well. There are people who will say that they believe that there is some sort of creator, but they don't necessarily believe that the creator is omnipotent and all powerful and controls everything. So we have that viewpoint as well, right? So what they're doing is they are addressing part of the continuum of opinion in order to build their argument. But they narrowed it by saying that they are going to explore two of the opinions. So that's how they narrowed their argument. Because otherwise, this would be a very long essay, right? Just think of all the religions that we just named off. So they quote Russell. Notice because it is a long quote, it is put into a block format. After they quote Russell, they say that eschatology now seems very bleak. And they rephrase what Russell stated. They put it in their own words. They're explicating the quote, which is what I'm expecting you to do in your own essays. Don't just use a quote and then take off. Remember, that's hit and run quoting. We don't do hit and run quoting in Comp 2. So they say this. Could somebody please read what's in the yellow?
What a philosopher like Russell stated so eloquently decades ago is a view that many contemporary cosmologists affirm. The grim ultimate fate of the entire cosmos is dissolution and destruction.
So, he's taking you back to cosmology. Keep that in mind. So, the world system is designed to continue expanding forever, breaking up and further disintegrating as it goes until all of its suns burn out and all forms of life have died. Sounds kind of like an apocalypse, right? Definitely dealing with eschatology, which is the fact that what's going to happen to us? It's the big questions. So now that they've narrowed their argument, they've gone over the continuum of opinion, they take you into their next subsection, which is gloom, doom, and morality. Now remember, they just told you all is lost. The world's going to die out. Everything's going to cease to exist. So they're using their words to support it. And then they say, okay, well, let's look at the naturalist worldview with its gloomy eschatology, which is rife with moral implications. And then they number what those implications are. Our existence is accidental. they bring Russell back into the argument. They summarize Russell and they say that he saw something beautiful about recognizing the ultimate tragedy of life, and he thought that sensitive people could find in the beauty of this tragedy sufficient motivation to pursue certain moral values in their lives. And he's labeling this as moral motivation. Well, if that's not enough to make you believe as a reader, they're going to bring in sociobiology. So they bring in biologist E.O. Wilson and philosopher Michel Roos, because these two people acknowledge that naturalism does not support traditional accounts of moral obligation, but they affirm that evolution has programmed us to feel that we have an obligation to do what is right. So this is how you use the source to agree and disagree. What they did is they found where people agreed, they found where people disagreed, and they wrote it out. And that's what I'm asking you to do in your essay 3. Where is their agreement and where is their disagreement? Now they're using it because what they want to show to you is that although some people will claim that there is no God, science still proves that our bodies respond in a way that we believe we still have an obligation to do something. This is why you have people who say, I just feel like I'm called to do this. And they aren't necessarily using it in a religious sense, right? You have people who say, I'm called to be a doctor, or I'm called to be a nurse, or I'm called to be a cop, or I'm called to be a teacher, right? Anything, yes? So they're saying science proves this. On the next page, on 213, they start questioning the moral biologist argument. And so they go through the moral biologist argument, and they start saying, according to Wilson, which would be the moral biologist argument, there is no compelling argument. His argument doesn't make sense. And then they say, if the naturalist is right, then no kingdom coming in, which will all be set right by God. There is no heaven and hell, and there's nothing after death but the emotion of consciousness and the visual universe of silence. He's like, I don't think they're right either. So then he takes you back to Immanuel Kant. And he tells you that Immanuel Kant is a moral philosopher, and that morality is this. Can somebody please read this?
Morality does not make rational sense unless we assume the existence of God and immortality, endless life after death. For if a perfectly good and powerful God exists, we can be confident that virtue will be rewarded in the end and that evil will be punished.
Thank you. So only if we have such moral faith, there's his qualifier. Only if you have moral faith in the ultimate outcome of things can we avoid the despair that arises out of fearing that moral effort may not be worth the trouble it takes. So what they are doing is they're saying, if you believe in a divine being, then this. But if you don't, hold on, and I'm going to tell you about that here in a minute. So they're trying to address both believers and non-believers alike in their essay. They flat out say that naturalism has no equivalent grounds for morality. And then they set out to prove why. Almost anyone takes stock of whether he or she is really obligated to do it, meaning to achieve important goals. If one is facing great danger, as in war and emergency, much more is at stake than simply being well-liked or filled with satisfaction. When we stand to lose our lives, the ultimate basis of morality becomes crucial, and it seems that naturalism has no deep basis for morality. So he's saying that, hey, the natural spin doesn't allow you to form any sort of moral code. So now that they've talked to you about all these varying philosophical viewpoints, they're going to take you back to the comic books. They're going to apply the natural law, the metaphysical law, the naturalist law. They're going to look for good and evil. They're going to look for reasoning. And they're going to walk you through it. So at the very bottom of 214, so if naturalism were true, there would be no real obligation for anyone like Superman to fight evil and injustice, partly because there would actually be no such thing as moral evil or injustice at all, and partly because there would be no obligations concerning anything. So if naturalism is true, then there is no good and evil. That's how Tallon and Walls, is interpreting this text. That's their interpretation of this view. On page 215, they start to address the naysayers regarding their argument. It places the moral sentiment of sympathy at a high value, to be sure, and it delights in a desire to be helpful, but at the same time, it downplays the importance of truth. So what's wrong with it is that they don't address truth. That's where they think that there is an issue with it. So they pose you with some questions that they want you to consider. They tell you that there are variations on these questions, and all these variations are dealing with history and philosophy. And it basically boils down to, what is the relationship between truth, beauty, and goodness? Most classic philosophers believe that these three are in a league together, that they are closely related, and that they're mutually supportive. In order to support the claim that they just made, they bring in Socrates and they bring in Nietzsche. Now we've been talking about these two people throughout the course. Socrates supports what Tallon and Walls just stated. By contrast, one of the hallmarks of the postmodern philosophy is skepticism, and that's Friedrich Nietzsche. So what they're doing here is they're contrasting the classical and postmodern philosophies. So you're still in a comparison and contrast essay. You turn the page to 216 and they're going to reaffirm their thesis. Naturalism, it seems, faces us with this rather disheartening dilemma. So naturalism has a dilemma, and we have to figure out how to overcome that dilemma. Given a naturalist view of things, there would be moments when what strikes us as a truth and what we take to be injustice stand in conflict with the choices that we face. So if they stand in conflict, then we need something else to guide us in the choices that we need to make for our life. Which brings us to our next subsection, a theological basis for superheroics. And they say, theologians want to offer a resolution to this dilemma that they have been discussing throughout their essay. Somebody please read what's in the yellow.
Naturalism drives a wedge between truth and justice, or in other words, between our feeling of moral obligation and our explanation for it. Let us propose a system that explains moral feeling and gives solid grounds for real moral obligation. Simply put, a metaphysical view of reality that allows a real place for moral principles and for objective distinctions between good and evil, along with an eschatology that allows for an appropriate system of reward and punishment can resolve the tension.
Thank you. So their answer to the dilemma is a metaphysical solution. In order to support this, they remind you about the view of Christian theism, and they say, obviously affirms this with the idea of a morally concerned personal creator and his doctrines. Then they take you to Zeus, Santos Else, the Tooth Fairy, Western philosophers, Augustine, Aquinas, Anselm, Descartes, Kierkegaard, and they say the list goes on. Why bring in so many different examples?
I think he's doing better than the other guy who brought up God, because he kind of he didn't seem to really acknowledge that he's gonna be turning off a lot of readers by bringing this up, but this guy does it by being like, I know a lot of you are gonna think that this is like fairy tale.
Yeah. Yeah. Not only that, but Tallon and Walls says that this is a serious eschatology. And then they propose to reframe the ideas in a simpler way regarding the doctrines of heaven and hell and the return of Christ. And it's this: there's a difference between good and evil, and therefore between justice and injustice, that moral decisions have ultimate long-term consequences, and that justice will prevail in the end. So, we are programmed to believe that there is a good and there is an evil. And because we're programmed to believe, whether we're religious or not, because science proves we're programmed to believe, then there needs to be some form of justice handed out to those who commit injustice to others. That's what they're saying here. So they walk you through the different varying beliefs. They take you back to the text, Kingdom Come. They quote Elliot Magan. So can somebody please read this?
In the story you hold in your hands, Mark Wade and Alex Ross tell us our proper response in the inexorable march of progress that has brought us to this place in time in the history of civilization is to find a way to confront it responsibly, not modestly, not unself-consciously, not with faith in a power greater than ours to descend from the sky and set things right.
Thank you. So now they're going to interpret Magan's quote. So they're going to explicate the quote that they just used, which is their evidence. Faith in a greater power leads either to irresponsible action or else inaction in the face of evil. They go on to explicate it. And in the middle of page 218, they say the idea is that God has created us to be co-creators of good with Him. So God's not the only person who gets to create good. We're supposed to create good. And they say that eschatology that promises eventual justice because it's grounded in hope. Because without hope, problems will arise. When you lose hope, injustice occurs. People will commit crimes when they lose hope. They apply it to Superman. They apply it to Batman. On the top of page 219, they restate everything that they've been talking about in the essay. Then they say the hope of ultimate justice can act as a corrective to both encouraging human efforts to bring justice through moral hope, while also providing limits through moral restraint. So a code of morals is needed because it provides some sort of structure for us to live our lives. It allows us to know what is good, what is evil, and allows us to determine who should be punished and who shouldn't be punished. That's what they are arguing. The importance of a hope and powers greater than ourselves to motivate us to action, sustain us in that action, however brutal it might at times look. A theological worldview like Christian theism offers one way to articulate this that makes sense of our deepest moral sentiments and inclinations. So please notice that they keep saying Christian theism. They do not say, we believe this. Are you catching on to that? So they're letting you know about this theory. Towards the very end of their essay on page 220, they talk about the superhero story. Could somebody please read it?
The superhero story is not simply a magnification of the human dilemma, but can also be an adaptation of the story of divine intervention. In his doubt and questioning, as well as in his hope-giving power, Superman shows a human need for faith and a greater power. Both sides of the story can also be found in the divine and human person of Jesus Christ.
Thank you. So then they take you back to the narrative kingdom come. After they do that, they tell you what it provides. Could somebody please read from it provides thee through the end of the essay?
It provides the truthful possibility of unbounded hope in contrast to a naturalistic eschatology built on a foundation of unyielding despair. What's more, such an eschatology allows one to hold consistently together hope and truth, as well as individual responsibility and a belief in ultimate justice. This is a great deal for any worldview to accomplish, and it is certainly a worldview that can help us accomplish a great deal.
Thank you. So, they have some really powerful rhetoric going on there in those last couple of paragraphs. Think about it. Truthful possibility of unbounded hope, unyielding despair, consistently together, belief in ultimate justice. Do you sound like you're in a comic book? You should. Because those are common words in a comic book. Why is it over the top? What's the point? Why is it okay to be so opinionated? Why not be mellow?
Because we're dealing with very big themes,
Yeah.
like God and the afterlife.
Yeah. If they don't take a stance, are they going to seem wishy-washy? Oh, for sure. They're not going to seem like they know what they're talking about. So what did you think of this essay? So reader response question.
Like I said, liked it better than the other one that brought up theology because it seemed like it acknowledged a lot of its audience was going to be turned off by that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Big difference in the expectations from the audience. They expect people to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
It's interesting how they play religion into comic books in such a, I don't know, it's just interesting to me that, because I mean, in like watching films such as, you know, Lord of the Rings, you don't expect to view that and then think about Christ, but how in like one of our last essays that we read through, it talked like that was an example, and it kind of tied it back into religion. It's interesting to see how a lot of the rhetoric that's been created throughout the years holds like a central viewpoint. It doesn't always necessarily denote to it specifically, but it has like either mild undertones or, you know, very, very heavy overtones of the religious viewpoint or the opposite of it. So I think it's really interesting that no matter what, like we're always kind of in that battle of does it exist, does it not exist, and then having to try and play into both opinions to figure out what we really believe. One thing I really felt like wasn't mentioned, but also was brought to my mind was the belief of karma. Yeah. And so being like a naturalist saying that you don't really believe that there is a God, it's more just about forces and human nature and things like that. I feel like karma was something that would play really well into this argument, but was never mentioned. But I think that might be specifically because it's more of a Hinduistic viewpoint, but just the belief that like for every action there's an equal or opposite reaction, and so believing that when you put something good out, you're gonna get good back. So
Yeah, I don't think they address karma at all. I think they're thinking cosmology is going to do that, but I don't think that belief is strong enough to warrant it, because I don't think people believe that cosmology and karma are alike. So yeah, good catch. Very good. Anything else? Okay, well, that ends our discussion for Tallon and Walls.